Okay, people, welcome to Economics in the News with Ignite Tutoring. Today's financial time. The effect of U.S. sanctions on Iran's COVID response. In 2018, Trump withdrew from the sort of world powers nuclear accord with Iran that lifted a lot of the sanctions that world powers had put on the country for trying to develop nuclear weapons. Iran is run by a Shia Muslim regime, Islamist regime, since 1979, when those religious forces kind of hijacked what was initially sort of a secular and leftist revolution. If you want the story of that, graphic novel Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi is the most accessible way to get a pretty nuanced picture of why Iran is run by these mullahs. So the Western world has sort of never forgiven this country for breaking out of its sphere of influence. The point here that I want to bring up in the economic side of it is, how do these sanctions actually work? You know, when people hear the term like economic sanctions, you often might picture like an old school, naval blockade or something where the U.S. Navy is not letting, ships into the port to bring in medical supplies or whatever it is. That's not at all how sanctions work anymore, right? They're financial in nature. Like so much of international policy, it's conducted via the financial system. So, but it's no less devastating for that. The Iranian healthcare system is dominated by university, pension fund, and military-run hospitals, with the private sector accounting for only 10% of all care. Both the private sector and the government sector can't get a lot of medical supplies, and especially components. And the reason for this is that they don't have the currencies in which these high-tech things are priced. So Iran is a petroleum exporting country. It's somewhat developed, but it's never really broken out of the post-colonial rut of sort of a not very diversified economy, right? They're really reliant on hydrocarbon exports to get hard currencies, that is dollars, euros, yen to some extent, yuan or renminbi, right? From the really industrialized core countries that can produce all of this high-tech stuff. They don't have factories to produce the latest medical technology in a place like Iran. I mean, they can produce some, right? It's not a completely backward economy, but it's not as advanced as Germany, right, or the U.S. or China. So the lack of export dollars that resulted from the reintroduction of sanctions in 2018, meaning they can't sell oil abroad for dollars. The lack of export dollars has hindered centrist President Hassan Rouhani's efforts to support the health sector, officials say. The health minister says the government has allocated only 30% of the 1 billion euros promised from the Sovereign Wealth Fund for the virus. And whether that's because the Sovereign Wealth Fund is hoarding euros because they are in a shortage, I don't know, or the government's just not very competent. That's also possible. Or because they can't find good projects to allocate it to because there's not enough, parts and stuff to build things. While global companies are still able to sell medical goods to Iranian companies, right? And this is another thing you have to remember about trade. It's companies selling to companies across borders. It's not like the United States does not sell things to Iran, right? I mean, maybe the government would sell weapons to another government, certainly not Iran's, but, it's mostly, when you think of, they say, Iran is buying these things. Well, it's companies in Iran. Global companies are still able to sell medical goods to Iranian companies. Sanctions on financial transactions mean they employ circuitous routes, forcing prices higher. So this is the crux of the matter, right? It's not that there's some U.S. Navy ship in the Mediterranean, the Gulf of Hormuz, saying, no, a container ship with medical supplies from Germany, you can't go and land in this Iranian port. It's not like that at all. It's that, one Iranian company importing, they give the example of the special light bulbs for a dental machine. It's not that you can't sell to Iran, it's that you can't finance that transaction through, I don't know if it's trade finance that they target, but probably the company in Iran has to borrow. They have to finance the deal in some way, right? These are big, multi-million-dollar deals. Or it may just be the banks, they can't route the payment, right? They can't get the payment there. Cross-border, wire the money, whatever they do. I don't know. I don't work in medical, procurement, or import-export. But it's not just like paying for a toothbrush at the CVS. If they have the cash, the dollars or the euros to buy the stuff, they can't get it there because the financial transactions that you need to move money across borders or borrow some money to finance the deal are blocked by U.S. sanctions. So that's really where they bite. This is really the way that sanctions work today. Adam Tooze, the economic historian, has a whole kind of section about this in his excellent book Crashed, which is about the decades since the financial crisis, that sanctions today really function on the financial level, right? It's the financial transactions that are being targeted, and that can really tie up trade and make things much more expensive because you have to move the money around through a whole bunch of different banks and a whole bunch of different jurisdictions, and they all take a fee, right? And that extra cost, the transaction costs, as economists would call it, get passed on to that hospital in Iran that's trying to buy this stuff. So they can get it, but it takes a long time and it's very expensive, and so their health system is just struggling, right? They've had one of the highest death rates in the region. Over 30,000 people have died in Iran out of, population of what a lot smaller than the U.S. is over the last year almost of this pandemic. So this is where, you can ask whether these sanctions are morally justified, right? Especially with the rest of the world has decided this Iran nuclear deal is good enough. Of course, the Democrats are arguing it was really stupid of Trump to withdraw from it, and whether it was the smart thing politically, if we agree with the goal of preventing Iran from developing the nukes. We can certainly disagree with the means of doing that, and are these kinds of sanctions that have these really major, humanitarian consequences. The U.S. administration is directly responsible for this, for the high level of deaths, health ministry spokesperson said. So, can you justify that ethically? And is it even particularly effective at toppling the Iranian regime, right, or weakening support for it? I don't know, right? You can just as easily imagine people in Iran sort of rallying around their country and its not so great leaders because they now feel that they're being victimized by the U.S. Unjustly. So let me know what you think in the comments. If you have questions about trade finance, or if you know more about it than I do and you want to enlighten me, please hit me up.